Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy Cam the Magic Man, back once again with the Renegade Master. Today I'm drinking a nice little green tea with some honey because I'm getting a little cold and my throat's sore and it's not nice. But it's not all sad, it's not all bad times, because I've got some very good news. This past week, your boy won Modern Friday Night Magic. 2 FNMs in a row, the winner. I can take that. That feels pretty good. I'm a fan of it. So, how did I do it? Well, I played Storm, and this is going to be, I think, the long-awaited and long-needed-to-be-done video on Storm and what Storm does as a deck and how I play it and how I feel about it. And also, it's going to be kind of an old-school, old-style FNM vlog where I go through and I talk through my matchups and just say how I feel about them and maybe some other nuggets of magic wisdom as we go along the way. So let's go for the main event. Storm, the deck in Modern. What is it? Storm is a deck which is entirely based on casting 20 or so spells in a turn and killing our opponent with Grape Shot. So Grape Shot is 1 and a red for a sorcery which says Grape Shot deals 1 damage to target creature or player, and it has Storm. When you cast this spell, copy it for each spell you cast. For each spell you've cast before it this turn, you may choose new targets for the copies. So in effect, the spell goes on the stack, and simultaneously, for each spell you've cast before this turn, just another copy of the spell, just hundreds of them, go on the stack as well, all at the same time. All the targets are chosen in that immediate moment, then they all resolve. So it's very resilient against things like counter spells, because unless they have something like Flusterstorm, which is a counter spell with Storm, they can usually only counter one of these spells before they all go off and kill our opponent. So it's a very resilient strategy in that sense. So Grape Shot is our main path to killing our opponent. We also have in the deck Empty the Warrens, which is 3 and a red, put 2 1/1 goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield sorcery, with Storm as well. So because we're usually just casting 1 card to kill our opponent, we're very vulnerable to things like Meddling Mage, which I believe is red and blue for a little human that, when it enters the battlefield, name a card name. Your opponent can't cast cards with the chosen name. There's similar effects like that throughout Modern. So if someone names Grape Shot, we're kind of in a bad situation, so we have Empty the Warrens in our main deck in case that happens to overcome it. So we know we want to cast these spells that when they're resolved they create loads of copies and hopefully kill our opponent or swarm them with goblins. But how are we going to cast loads and loads and loads of spells before we do that? A big part of the deck is a spell called Gifts Ungiven. And Gifts Ungiven allows you to search a library for up to 4 cards with different names and reveal them. Your opponent then chooses 2 of those cards, puts 2 of them into your graveyard and the rest into your hand. Then shuffle your library. The 4 that we choose, once we get to enough mana to cast a Gifts Ungiven, will always be a Pyretic Ritual, well, most often be a Pyretic Ritual, which is 1 in the red, add 3 red to your mana pool. Desperate Ritual, 1 in the red, add 3 red to your mana pool. So these spells help us to create more mana than we currently have, which is very important because we need mana to cast spells, and if we cast a spell that gives us mana, then that's just a means to an end because it adds the storm count and it increases the amount of total spells we can later cast. We also have Mana Morphos. Add 2 mana in any combination of colours to your mana pool, draw a card. That costs 1 green or red mana. We will always pay red for it. What Mana Morphos does is it allows us to turn our red mana from Pyretic Ritual or Desperate Ritual into blue mana, so we can cast things like Gifts Ungiven, or we can cast a couple other spells we have in our deck that are blue in the process of our big long chain of spells. So we'll also fetch off of our Gifts Ungiven Past in Flames. Each instant is 3 and a red, sorry, for a sorcery. Each instant and sorcery in your graveyard gains flashback until the end of the turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. That means you can cast an instant or sorcery spell in your graveyard for its mana cost, then you must exile it. So we've got loads of these little rituals that allow us to generate loads and loads of mana. We cast all of those, put them all in our graveyard. We then cast a Past in Flames, cast them all again, get a whole load more mana, and then we've likely got Gifts Ungiven in our graveyard. We can cast it again and just keep chaining through the spells. However, that leaves us in a very tight situation in terms of mana and having to count our mana and having to be very careful in what order we cast our spells. So we have in the deck ways to reduce the cost of our instant and sorceries, so then we get more surplus mana when we cast things like Pyretic Ritual. So Pyretic Ritual, when you cast it for 1 the red, and it gives you 3 red mana, you only go up by 1 mana. However, if we have something like Goblin Electromancer, a Goblin Wizard for blue and red, he's a 2/2, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less. If we have him on the battlefield, we pay 1 red to get 3 red, which means we're up by 2. And that doesn't sound like a big number from like 1 or 2 extra mana, but it really does add up when everything you cast costs 1 less. So we have Goblin Electromancer, like I say, to reduce the cost of instant and sorcery spells by 1. We also have Baral, Chief of Compliance, who is a 1 blue legendary human wizard, who's a 1/3, and he says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters as a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So we're mostly interested in him making things cost 1 less. So let's talk about an ideal hand for us to go off and win via storming off. We'd have a Goblin Electromancer on the battlefield. Well, let's start at turn 3. So turn 3, we have 2 lands on the battlefield, we draw for turn. What we want to do to win on turn 3 is play a land, tap 2 lands to play a creature that reduces the mana cost of our spells by 1. We then cast off our remaining open mana land, tap it, cast Pyretic Ritual into Pyretic Ritual, Desperate Ritual, just 2 of the rituals. So then we shoot up to 5 mana. Then we cast a Manamorphose, which takes us to 6 mana, 2 of which is now blue. We draw a card. That can be maybe another ritual, maybe a Manamorphose, maybe something we need. So it's always important to remember the draw the card bit. Then in our hand, we cast a Gifts Ungiven we have. We fetch Past in Flames, Pyretic Ritual, Manamorphose, and Desperate Ritual. Your opponent chooses them, puts them into 2 piles. It doesn't really matter at that point because we have enough mana to cast them. Because we would go from the 6 available mana we've created down to 3 with the gifts. Then if they give us the worst possible combination, which is Past in Flames and Manamorphose in our hand, we cast a Manamorphose, go from 3 up to 4, are able to cast Past in Flames for 3 mana, not 3. And then we have 1 mana left to start casting the rituals left in our graveyard, then we start chaining. As you can see from just me explaining it verbally, it is a very heavily complicated deck, and it's quite hard to reach this kind of chain of events where you win. And it will get to the point in this long churning for our spells where we've pretty much gotten rid of all the rituals in our graveyard to have a load of mana. We'll cast another Gifts Ungiven. We'll likely fetch Grape Shot, perhaps a Noxious Revival, which is green, or Phyrexia mana, which is pay 2 life. We'll pay 2 life. Put a card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. We'll then fetch a Remand, counter target spell. If that spell counters this way, put it into his owner's hand over into the player's graveyard, draw a card. And we'll probably fetch a Manamorphose as well. So we're going to have a load of surplus mana. They will position these cards as they will. But what it means is we can cast a Grape Shot. We can remand it, so we've got all these copies on the stack. We'll put the original one back into our hand. All of the other ones will resolve. Then we'll cast the Grape Shot in our hand again. So let's say we have 10 Storm. We cast a Grape Shot. That creates 11 copies in total, because it puts Storm 10 up to 11. So we've got 11 copies. And we remand the first one, return it to our hand, the first original card. Then the 10 copies on the stack resolve, kill our opponent, hit with 10. Then we can cast the Grape Shot again, this time for 13 copies, because we will cast a Remand, taking us to Storm 12. Then we will cast the Grape Shot again, taking us to 13. So that's a total of 23 damage if we Grape Shot, Remand, Grape Shot. You can't Grape Shot whilst it's in your graveyard. Well, you can't Remand a Grape Shot if it's in your graveyard affected by Past in Flames, because if you flash back a Grape Shot, it will exile itself, and it won't be something you can put back in your hand because it's removed from the game. So that's why we get the Noxious Revival to put it on top of our deck. We then cast a Manamorphose to draw a card, create some mana, and then we can just have the Grape Shot in our hand. Doesn't really matter if the Remand's in the graveyard, because it's not the Remand we're worried about, it's the Grape Shot which we want to put back in our hand. So that's a very, hopefully that is a coherent way to explain the deck. It's a deck you kind of have to see being played to fully understand it. We also have Empty the Warrens to create goblins in our main board, and that's very strong against decks like Jund or certain control decks, because I'd say it's good against Jund. It's good against Mardu if they don't hit Anger of the Gods, which is 1 red red, deal 3 damage to all creatures. It's very good against more slower, fair mid-range decks because we can produce about 10 goblins, then attack, then attack, then attack. And yes, they'll have blockers, probably 2 or 3 blockers, but just attacking with 10 goblins every turn presents such a heavy clock, it will likely kill them by the time they are able to adequately deal with it. So goblins is really good against mid-range decks, which are going to make you discard cards, etc. etc. Just a side thing on goblins there. So, we know Empty the Warrens, we know Grape Shot, we know Past in Flames, we know Gifts Ungiven, we know Pyrotic Ritual, Baral, Electromancer, Manamorphose, Desperate Ritual, Noxious Revival. The rest, and we also know Remand. The rest of our deck is going to be ways to, hopefully, get our hand to the point which I described on turn 3, where we can just explode and kill our opponent in 1. So we have 4 copies of Serum Visions. It's 1 blue mana, draw a card, scry 2. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put any of them on the top or the bottom of your library in any order. This allows us to, first of all, replace the Serum Visions with any other card that would be more relevant. In certain situations, even a land is more relevant. It also lets us look at the top 2 and decide what we need to get to that perfect hand hit situation. It's not uncommon just to bottom both. If they don't help your current hand situation, you can draw something a little more effective. I think Serum Visions is the main culprit for why this deck sometimes looks like it just works itself. It just seems like it always has what it needs to win, because it allows you to effectively dig 3 cards deep to find what you need and remove 3 draws from what you don't need. It kind of accelerates you in assembling what you need. We also have Sleight of Hand, which is 1 blue mana for a sorcery, which says look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other on the bottom of your library. So you look at the top 2, choose 1 in hand of 1 bottom, and that lets you look at 2 cards, choose what is best for your current hand situation and have it. So it replaces itself with pretty much a lot of the time a better card. We also have Opt, which is a single blue mana for an instant which says scry 1, draw a card. So that also lets you in a way select what cards you want in a kind of less strategic way than Sleight of Hand. And I mean strategic as in you can't see both cards, so you can't make the more focused decision on what you need. You can scry and then gamble if you want something better than the card you see on top and get that instead. Now, the main difference between Opt and Sleight of Hand is Sleight of Hand is a sorcery, whilst Opt is an instant. And against certain matchups, like blue control matchups, or against matchups which will try and kill you in 1 turn and just summon a big creature and smash you down, like something like Escape Shift or Amulet Titan, if they resolve a Titan, then you're in big trouble. Sleight of Hand's worse, because what if you're sitting on a hand which doesn't have a counter spell on it and you need to draw a counter spell? Sleight of Hand you can't use at that moment because it's during their turn. Opt you can use, and it gives you 2 chances, 2 draws, maybe, well, a look at 2 cards of your deck to see if you hit your Amanda, if you hit your counter spell, to stop them resolving the spell that kills you. So currently I run 4 Sleight of Hand and 3 Opt. I've been thinking of switching to 4 Opt and 3 Sleight of Hand, just because of the utility of Opt against matchups where you want to be countering spells, when you want to be a bit more proactive in interacting with the other deck and not just all in on your combo. But that's just a thought. So yeah, we've also got these total of 4, 8, 11 spells, which helps us dig for our deck and ultimately find our Gifts Ungivens to start going off with our mana reducers. And very much this deck is, when can I resolve Gifts Ungiven, and will I kill my opponent with it? Oh, this is a delicious, delicious cup of honey tea. I am in love with it right now. So, let's talk sideboard. So, threats to Storm. One of the biggest threats to Storm is artifact-based hate or creature-based hate. Things like Kambao, Consort of Allocation. 1 black-white. Whenever your opponent casts an instant sorcery, instant or sorcery spell, or maybe might even be non-creature, but a lot of the spells we have, your opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, I believe. I might have this wrong, I'll flash it up. But what it effectively says is every time you cast an instant sorcery spell, you lose life, which is really bad for a deck like us. So we have to deal with creatures like Kambao or Eidolon the Great Revel, which is 1 in the red, when your opponent casts a spell, or any player casts a spell with a cost 3 or less, Eidolon does 2 damage to you, to your opponent, to the person that cast it. Sorry, I'm getting a bit confused here. Eidolon the Great Revel, 1 in the red, It's for a 2/2. When a player that casts a spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, that player takes 2 damage. So all of our deck, apart from Gifts Ungiven, Past in Flames, and Empty the Warrens, all costs 3 or less. So we'll take a crap ton of damage if they manage to resolve an Eidolon. And there's also Gaddock Teague, which is green and a white. Players can't cast spells with converted mana cost 4 or higher. That shuts us off Gifts Ungiven. That shuts us off Past in Flames, which puts us in a really difficult situation to chain together our spells. So first things to deal with these like creatures that enter the battlefield and cause us problems. We have 3 copies of Lightning Bolt, and in general, they're brought in against things like humans, against things which are likely going to have hate bears like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, 1 in the white for a 2/1 first striker. All instant and sorcery spells cost 1 more. We want to reduce the cost of our spells because it's so difficult otherwise in terms of mana allocation to chain off. So even making our spells cost 1 more can completely shut down our entire deck. So we have lightning bolts to deal with those. Against decks like Tron, or against control decks which have very pushed mana bases, and by pushed I mean decks which have fetch lands, decks which have shock lands, loads of non-basic lands. We have 2 Blood Moons, all non-basic lands are mountains. We don't mind if our non-basic lands are turned to mountains because we are a blue-red deck. As long as we have 1 island out, we're kind of fine because we just need 1 blue source, usually a turn at most. And we have mana morphoses to turn our red mana into blue mana. So we're not too worried about Blood Moon. So if we're against Tron, we can just pop a Blood Moon down, slow them down really, really considerably, and then give us just the chance to win under them because we only need 1 turn, a really explosive turn, just to kill our opponent in 1. We also have another Empty the Warrens. This is good against things like humans where they might name Grape Shot off of Meddling Mage, but it's also good, like I say, against more mid-range matchups because they find it quite hard to deal with a very heavy board of goblins. It's just if a deck's full of a lot of single target removal or doesn't have a lot of board wipes in it, which not a lot of decks generally do in mid-ranging. I think Mardu does. I've never seen Jund pull out any kind of Anger of the Gods board wipe. They might side in things like Engineered Explosives, which allows you to destroy all permanents of mana cost X or less, so they can just destroy goblins really easily because they're 0 mana cost creatures. But yeah, Empty the Warrens does create this big massive clock which presents a problem for our opponent. We have 4 pieces of the puzzle, which is against more controlling decks which are likely going to be running counter spells like Cryptic Commands or Negates or anything like that, depending on what you're facing. So these are also quite good against Jund in a way, because what piece of the puzzle does, in comparison to something like Sleight of Hand, it allows us to look at the top 5 cards of our library, reveal them, put 2 sorcery cards from among them into your hand and put the rest into your graveyard for 2 in the blue. So it allows us to put what we it's draw 2, but it's a selective draw 2. And drawing, like, imagine if we're in a situation we have a mana reducer out, our hand's looking okay and we just need to draw like a gifts. This lets us look 5 cards down for a gifts. It also, in a very controlling grindy matchup where maybe we're just going to resolve like an Empty the Warrens on 2 or 3, it allows us to fill our hand with maybe 1 or 2 rituals if we already have like an Empty the Warrens, then Empty the Warrens for about 3-4 and present this big goblin threat. So if we're in a matchup which is going to Fort Seize us, which is 1 in the black, look at your opponent's hand and make them discard a card, you lose 2 life. Or if we're against something like a heavy control deck which is going to try and stop us from making our plays, pieces of the puzzle allows us to refuel our hand, probably the best of anything, so we usually take out Sleight of Hand to put in pieces of the puzzle. We have 1 Dispel against controlling matchups as well. It's also very Dispel is 1 of the blue counter target instant spell. It's also very good against Titan Breach or things running through the breach. So through the breach, I believe, is 3 in a red, put target legendary creature onto the battlefield from your hand, it gains haste, exile it at the end of the turn, or destroy it at the end of the turn. So Dispel allows us to counter a Through the Breach against a matchup which is using it. Usually they're Through the Breach like Titan, Primeval Titan, and they'll get Valakut the Molten Pinnacle down and blow us up. Primeval Titan, when it attacks or enters the battlefield, allows you to fetch 2 lands from your deck and put 1 onto the battlefield. Valakut the Molten Pinnacle does damage to the amount of mountains you have to your opponent. I don't know, I haven't played Scapeshift or Valakut, but this allows us to stop them through the breaching a Titan at us. Allows people stop people through the breaching and Emrakul, which is a big flying monster. When it attacks, makes you sacrifice 6 permanents. We usually don't have many permanents on the battlefield, so us sacrificing 6 will take us to nothing on board. So 1 Dispel is really good against stopping that, because it like puts us back to the Dark Ages. Next we have Wipe Away, Echoing Truth, Shattering Spree, and Shattering Spree, 2 Shattering Sprees. So recently there's been a lot of very, very good artifact hate cards for Storm. One I'll highlight and talk about, which is kind of a big kid on the block, is Dampening Sphere. So Dampening Sphere is 2 mana for an artifact which says, for each spell that is cast this turn, spells cost 1 more to cast. So if you cast 2 spells this turn, you go to cast your third will cost 2 more, I believe, because 2 spells have been cast before it. Like I say, things that increase the mana cost of our spells really shut down our deck, because we want to cast our spells for as cheap as possible, to cast as many as possible, to cast a big grape shot. So if our opponent has one of those out, we're going to want to use Shattering Spree, which is 1 in the red, destroy target artifact. It has Replicate for red. When you play this spell, copy it for each time you paid its Replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copy. So it's kind of like Storm, but you pay for it, so you can put copies of it on the stack. So Dampening Sphere is very difficult for us to deal with. We want to hit that with a Shattering Spree. We also have Echoing Truth, return target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent to owner's hand. If they have 2 Dampening Spheres out, this allows us just to return all of them in one go. Wipe Away, which is 1 blue, split second, return target permanent to his owner's hand. This allows us to get rid of artifacts and not be afraid of there being any interaction. Another one to talk about is Chalice of the Void. Now, Chalice of the Void is a very interesting card. It's XX. When Chalice of the Void enters the battlefield, put X charge counters on it, I believe. And then you counter any spell which has converted mana cost X as it's being cast. So, if they Chalice of the Void on 2, we can't cast our Barrels, we can't cast any of our rituals, we can't cast our Grape Shots, and we are pretty much completely shut out the game by a Chalice on 2. So we have Wipe Away, which costs 3 mana to return it to their hand. We have Shattering Spree, which allows us to destroy it. And if they have a Chalice on 1 as well, it's only as the spell is being cast. So if we put little Replicate copies on the stack, the first one is like destroyed, but if we have 2 copies we've paid for, those resolve because they haven't technically been cast. So Shattering Spree with the Replicate ability is very good at dealing with multiple chalices. So let's say, just to give you an idea of what we do if we are facing down Chalice on 1 and Chalice on 2 and we had 4 mana open, what we do is we'd cast Gifts Ungiven and we'd fetch out of our deck probably, well, a Chalice on 1 and a Chalice on 2 is very difficult to stop, but a Chalice on 2, we would just a single Chalice on 2, we cast Gifts Ungiven, we get a Shattering Spree, and we get a Wipe Away and a Noxious Revival, and we probably put into our hand just a Mana Morphose as well, fetch that, or anything else we need to further go off. But the main important parts are Shattering Spree, Noxious Revival, and a Wipe Away. Because if they put both Wipe Away and Shattering Spree into our graveyard, knowing we're going to try and resolve it, we can then cast Noxious Revival they put into our hand, pay 2 life, put either Wipe Away or Shattering Spree from our graveyard on top of our library, draw it for turn, cast it, destroy their Chalice, and hopefully go off and kill them in response. And there are a couple flex spots in the deck. You can take cards out to put these cards in. If you're putting in pieces of the puzzle, I find I will generally just take out Force Sleight of Hand as being one of the worst versions of that kind of dig through your deck kind of card in this deck in its current version I'm playing. Against certain matchups where I'm not too concerned about countering spells, I might take out up to 2 Remands, but I'll leave 1 in case I want to Grape Shot, Remand, Grape Shot to kill them. I will take out up to 2 Goblin Electromancers. I will take out 1 Mountain from my mana base just to put things in, and occasionally I will lose 1 Pyretic Ritual if I don't feel like I'm ever going to hit a big long chain of spells. I might lose a Pyretic Ritual, say, for one of my 3 Lightning Bolts or one of my Blood Moons, if I feel that's something I'd rather draw instead. And just a brief little talk on sideboarding in Modern. Like I've just explained to you, if you have a sideboard for your Modern deck and you're not really utilising it to its best ability, or you're finding yourself getting beaten by certain decks quite strongly in your main board, and you don't find yourself sideboarding anything in to try and stop them, have a moment, think about what cards there are in your main deck you'd like to lose when facing said deck you're having difficulty with. So, just for one brief example, before I was going to talk about the entire FNM in total, but we're up to about 24 minutes now. I don't want to make you spend your entire day watching this video, so we'll just talk very briefly about sideboarding, and then I shall bid you adieu. So, sideboarding in Modern. Let's say you're playing Tron and you're against me. In your sideboard, you have two very good cards to put in your sideboard are Thought Not Seer, which is 3 and a colourless. Look at your opponent's hand, make them discard a card from their hand. I believe it's even exile a card from their hand, and then when Thought Not Seer dies, that opponent draws a card. So if I'm on a potentially slow hand and you manage to hit Tron turn 3, yes, you're not playing a very big mana efficient threat on turn 3 with your 7 mana you've assembled by Tron. If you haven't heard me talk about Tron before, it's a deck where you assemble Urza's Mine, Urza's Tower, and Urza's Power Plant. And when all three are on the battlefield, Urza's Mine and Urza's Power Plant tap for 2 mana each, and Urza's Tower taps for 3. So in total you get 7 mana. So turn 3 you have 7 mana, you usually play like a big Worm Coil Engine, which I flash up now. It's a big 6/6 Death Touch Lifelinker that when it dies summons a 3/3 Death Toucher and a 3/3 Lifelinker. So yeah, your plan is to resolve a big high mana cost threat very early, and just from that point on have so much advantage by casting a very high cost spell you just kind of kill your opponent. With something like Worm Coil Engine, you're getting so much life, you're destroying so much of their advantage with this big Death Toucher, it's very hard to kind of overcome it. So when you're resolving something like Thought Not Seer, which is less mana efficient and is over a smaller creature, it might not feel as good, but the ability to pluck a Gifts Ungiven or a Past in Flames out from my hand is very strong. So considering something like a Thought Not Seer is always a good thing to do. It also means if I Blood Moon, which might slow me down because I'll stick with a hand which has Blood Moon in, which might not be the fastest and most efficient hand, it allows you to do something on turn 4 which then slow me down and give you a chance just to play your lands and then just eventually play a big threat, maybe turn 6. I'd also consider Warping Wall. Warping Wall is 1 and a colourless for an instant which says destroy target creature with power or toughness 1, counter target sorcery spell, or summon a 1/1 Eldrazi's Titan for 1. I would have a couple of those in your sideboard to switch in against something like Storm, because destroy creature power toughness 1 destroys my Barals, which generally I'm going to keep in second game once I've sideboarded over Goblin Electromancer, just because Baral is just kind of a better version. It allows you to counter my Past in Flames as I go to try and cycle through my graveyard. So let's say I'm on the play, so I play first. You've got a Tron land, just a forest out. You've got a Tron land, a forest, and you played a map turn 1 and you've passed, not cracking your map. A map is 1 mana cost artifact, pay 2, search for a land out your library, and search for a land out your library, then you add it to your hand and you can play it that turn if you want to, if you have an available land play. So you've left green and the colourless open. Let's say I turn 3, I've got the perfect hand we described, and I start going off, and I'm going to cast a Past in Flames to cast from a graveyard and stop you. Warping Wall, counter my Past in Flames. That puts me in a really rough situation because I've likely blown through a lot of my gas in my hand, all my rituals. I have to wait and draw maybe a couple other cards before I'm at a point where I can Past in Flames to win. So Warping Wall's very good. And what to take out of your deck in something like Tron, I consider taking out anything which costs more than 7, because anything that costs more than 7, you're saying I want to get to turn 4 to cast this and potentially stop my opponent. And by turn 3 I want to have won, and if you resolve a very big threat turn 4, if it doesn't completely change your life total or stop me from casting spells or destroy all my lands on turn 4, you switch over to me on my turn 4 or my turn 5, depending if I go first or second, I'm likely just going to win from that position. So consider things like this when sideboarding Modern. Consider what cards can I have in my sideboard to bring in and what should I take out. Like I've described, I would maybe take out Sleight of Hands for pieces of the puzzle. I might take in a Ritual or an Electromancer for something which I feel is more impactful in the matchup. And that's very important to think about. And I think that's where we'll sign off for today. I could wax on very lyrically about FNM and how I won and everything, but I think just more a general discussion of how this deck works. For people that have seen Storm and are interested in buying it, it's kind of a deck you have to be taught to use instead of just plain use. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I've been your boy Cam the Magic Man. I hope you're looking forward to next Friday like me, and have a good week.